Montana Territory, spring of 1877. The wind howled over the plains south of Helena, and the sky rolled with bruised clouds heavy with late snow, when a man collapsed face first on the porch of a quiet homestead. Gwenyth Sutter had just finished hauling wood in from the shed when she saw him tall, slumped, half buried in the wind-driven frost. She dropped the bundle and ran. "Sir!" Her voice cracked as she knelt beside him, her hands already moving. His skin burned with fever. His coat was torn, blood at the seams. "God in heaven!" She rolled him onto his side. His lips were dry, cracked. His beard was thick with ice. One eye fluttered open, the other purpled shut. His breath rattled like broken glass. "Help! My kids!" That was all he said before the world slipped away from him. She dragged him inside, one arm over her shoulders, boots scraping across the wood floor, and got him onto the settee near the stove. She stoked the fire high, stripped his coat, and cut open his shirt to see where the blood came from. A bullet had grazed his ribs. Old, infected. She bit her lip and went to boil water. Gwenyth had lived alone for 5 years. Since the day the cholera took her husband and the baby with him. She had not nursed anyone since. But there was no one else for miles. As she pressed a hot cloth to his wound, he groaned. His eyes opened again, clearer now. "Where am I?" His voice was rough gravel. "You're in my home," she said. "You collapsed on my porch. You have a fever and a bullet wound. You're lucky I heard you hit the wood." He blinked at her, dazed. "My name's Lawson Reed. I was headed north. My wagon broke apart near the river. I walked for 2 days. She dipped the cloth back into the water. "You should have died out there." "I might have," he muttered. "Except I could not leave them." Gwenyth paused. "Leave who?" "My children. Rosalie and Remy. They're still out there." His voice cracked. "I'm all south of the Black Creek Fork. I left them with a blanket and what food we had left. I was trying to find help." Gwenyth stood straight. "How long ago?" "Yesterday morning." She was already pulling on her boots. "You cannot go out there," he rasped. "The storm, if they are still alive, they won't be for much longer." Lawson tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his face. "Please, I am not arguing," Gwenyth said, grabbing her coat. "You brought them this far. Let me do the rest." She saddled her mare fast, teeth clenched against the wind. She rode hard, southward, the cold slicing through her coat like knives. At the fork in the creek, she found them. 2 children huddled beneath an overturned wagon tarp, curled against each other like pups. The girl, maybe 8, clutched a tin cup. The boy, younger, stared wide-eyed at her with blue eyes just like his father's. Gwenyth slipped down from her horse and crouched. "Your papa sent me." "I am here to take you to him." Rosalie looked her up and down, wary. "Are you a nurse?" "No," Gwenyth said. "But I can get you warm." The girl nodded once. Gwenyth lifted Remy into her arms and helped Rosalie onto the horse. They rode back slow, careful. Lawson cried when he saw them. Actual tears. Gwenyth had not seen a man cry like that in years. He reached for his children as they rushed to him. "You are safe," he whispered. "You are safe." Gwenyth stood back, arms crossed over her chest, heart pounding in her throat. She had done what no one had done for her 5 years ago. She had saved someone's family. That night, she gave up her bed to the children and hung blankets for privacy. Lawson slept on the settee. Fever still clung to him, but his eyes tracked her now always. By morning, the color had returned to his face. "I owe you more than I can say," he whispered as she changed the poultice on his ribs. "You owe me nothing," she said softly. "I walked through snow with no food," he said. "I thought I would die and leave them to it. Then I saw your house. Like it was meant to be there." She looked up at him. It was. They shared breakfast at the small pine table, the children bundled in quilts. Remy clung to her skirts. Rosalie watched her with quiet eyes. By the 3rd day, Lawson could stand with help. He limped to the porch with her, leaning on a crutch she fashioned from a broom handle. "You live here alone?" he asked. "I do." No family? Not anymore. He nodded. I am sorry. She looked out across the snow. I am not. Not today. He glanced at her, his expression soft. It is a hard thing, losing what you love. It is. But sometimes you find something else. He held her gaze. His hand brushed hers. By the end of the week, the storm had passed. The wagon was beyond repair, but the mare could pull a sled. Lawson sat beside the fire, Remy asleep in his lap. Gwenyth watched him from the kitchen. He looked up. I do not want to take them away from here, he said. She froze. You do not. He shook his head. You saved us. You gave them warmth, food, safety. And you gave me something I thought I would never feel again. He stood, walked to her, and took her hand. Peace. Her breath caught. I loved my wife, he said. I always will. But I buried her 2 years ago. And I have been walking towards something ever since. I think now it was you. Tears stung her eyes. I do not know what to say. Say you will let us stay. Say I can build us a home beside yours. Say we can be a family. She reached up and touched his cheek. You already are. He leaned in and kissed her soft, sure. The fire crackled behind them. From the other room, Rosalie's quiet voice murmured in her sleep. Lawson wrapped his arms around her, and she let herself lean in. She had not known how empty her heart had been until he stepped into it. And now she would never be alone again. The thaw came slow that year. Snow turned to mud by inches, and the ground stayed frozen beneath the topsoil clear into April. The creek ran high with melt, and the wind carried the scent of wet pine and horses. Gwenyth stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Lawson drive fence posts into the softening earth just beyond the buckwheat field. His limp slowed him, but he worked steady, jaw tight against the ache she knew still lingered. Remy sat near the barn with a stick in each hand, digging trenches in the dirt. Rosalie helped Gwenyth with the washing. Her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Eyes narrowed in concentration as she wrung out each shirt without being asked. I never did this before, she said, not looking up. Gwenyth glanced over. You're doing it right. My mama always let me play while she worked. Said I'd get my hands rough. Hands can be rough and still be kind. Rosalie paused at that, then nodded once and went back to wringing. By evening, the shirts hung stiff on the line, and Lawson's shoulders bore streaks of dust and sweat. He dipped a tin bucket into the rain barrel and poured it over his head, gasping as the cold hit him. Gwenyth brought out a dry towel and held it out wordlessly. He took it with a faint grin. You always watch me work like that? I like knowing you're still upright. And here I thought it was my charm. She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. I sent a letter to my brother in Kansas, he said. Told him we're staying. Asked him to send the tools I left behind. You're sure? She asked without turning. I'm not a man who's ever been certain of much. But I know what peace feels like now. She nodded once, then walked back inside. That night, they sat close by the hearth, the children already asleep behind the curtain. Gwenyth stitched a tear in Remy's shirt while Lawson carved a new spoon from pine. The fire popped, and outside, the frogs had begun their spring chorus. I've been thinking, he said after a while. We've made do these few weeks sharing space, but there's no sense in pretending this is temporary. She didn't look up. No, I want to build on. A proper room for the children. Maybe another for us. Her needle paused mid-stitch. You speak as though that's already decided. He set down the spoon and met her eyes. Isn't it? She set the shirt aside. I've lived a long time without needing anything but quiet. Then you arrived and it wasn't quiet anymore. It was better. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm not asking to change your life. Just to be part of it. She folded her hands in her lap. I buried a husband, Lawson. I stitched his shirt clean, same as this one, and laid it over his chest. I swore I'd never feel that weight again. I can't promise anything beyond today, he said. But I can promise I'll carry it with you. Her voice caught. And what about the children? They need steadiness. They've had none for too long. Rosalie asked if she could plant carrots beside the barn. Said she wants to stay where things grow. Gwenyth closed her eyes for a beat, then opened them. You'll need new boots before winter. I will. And better hinges on the door. I'll see to them. She rose, crossed the room, and sat beside him on the bench. Their knees touched. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. You'll need a ring, she said softly. I've one my father wore. It's not much, but it's honest. That's all I ever wanted. He leaned in, forehead to hers. The firelight danced over their faces, and neither spoke again that night. When the sun rose next, Gwenyth opened the door to a sky clear and gold with promise. Rosalie ran past her with a spade in hand, Remy on her heels. Lawson joined her on the stoop, his hand finding hers without hesitation. They stood side by side, watching the day begin. A new room would be added. A garden would grow. And in time, the land would remember them not as two strangers who happened upon each other, but as one family rooted deep, steady as the earth beneath their feet. The frame of the new addition rose slowly, nailed together with salvaged boards from the old barn back wall and lengths Lawson had traded for with a neighbor to the east. The sound of hammering now marked the afternoons, steady and patient. Gwenyth measured each beam twice before he raised it. She had an eye for straight lines, and he trusted her more than any carpenter he'd ever known. In the cool shade of the cottonwood, Remy sat stringing wildflowers across a length of twine, his tongue between his teeth. Rosalie read aloud from the school primer Lawson had brought in his wagon, her voice halting but clear. When she paused too long, Gwenyth gently filled in the word without looking up from her sewing. I want to teach, Rosalie said as she shut the book, dust rising from its cracked spine. When I'm grown. You can, Gwenyth answered, tying off the thread on the inside of the collar she'd mended. There'll be need for teachers anywhere there are children. Lawson came in from the field with his sleeves rolled back and a new scratch down his forearm. He poured himself a dipper of well water, then stood over the table, breathing evenly. There's a man in town, he said. Name's Everett Molland. Owns the mill. Says he's got work for me hauling timber come summer. Gwenyth looked up. You thinking to take it? I am. It's decent pay and steady. We could buy proper window glass before the freeze. She folded the shirt. You'll be gone long days. I'll be back every evening. It's only 5 miles. He's got a team I can use if I bring my own harness. Rosalie leaned forward. Can we come see the mill one day? If your mother agrees, Lawson said. The word caught in the air between them. Gwenyth met his eyes. They've been calling me that already? He nodded slow. They asked if I'd mind. I told them I didn't think you would. I don't. That night, she stood barefoot on the edge of the porch, her arms around herself, listening to the calls of nightbirds rising from the tree-line. Lawson came out behind her, his steps light. He rested his hand on the small of her back. I laid out the ring, he said. It's on the table. She looked up at him. You think now's the right time? I do. We've made a life. It's only waiting for a name. She turned, rested her hands on his chest. Then ask me. He took her fingers in his. Gwenyth Sutter, will you be my wife? She didn't speak right away. Instead, she lifted her hand to his face and held it there, her thumb tracing the ridge of his cheekbone. I will. The next morning, they rode into town together with the children in the back of the wagon, dressed in their best. The preacher stood in front of the chapel with a kerchief tucked into his collar and a Bible worn soft at the corners. No one else was there but the birds and the dust. When he asked Lawson to speak his vow, Lawson turned to Gwenyth and said, I promise to walk beside you, no matter the road. And when it was her turn, Gwenyth said, I promise to keep a fire burning for you even in the deepest cold. Afterward, Rosalie took Gwenyth's hand and whispered, Mama suits you. They returned to the homestead with sunlight flickering through the leaves. That night, Lawson carried her over the threshold of the house they'd mended together. The children slept soundly behind the curtain, and outside, the wind moved gently through the barley shoots. Gwenyth lay beside him, her fingers curled around his wrist, her breath steady as the earth settling after a long storm. I didn't think I'd ever feel like this again, she said. He kissed her temple. You don't have to say it. I know. They lay quiet after that, the kind of silence that only comes when nothing needs to be proven anymore. And in the morning, they rose as husband and wife, to a life they had built with bare hands and open hearts. By early June, the wheatgrass reached waist-high in the low field east of the house, and the days came long and dry. Mornings began with the soft clatter of the stovetop kettle and Lawson lifting Remy onto the bench with one arm while setting kindling with the other. Gwenyth had taken to rising before the sun, slipping out to tend the hens barefoot, skirts gathered in one hand. She liked the hush of that hour when the world still held its breath. One morning she came in holding a brown egg still warm from the nest. "There's a hawk circling the coop," she said as she set the egg gently into the bowl beside the flour tin. "We'll need to run netting over the top if we want the chicks to last another week." Lawson nodded, tying his bootlaces. "I can trade with the mill for some mesh. Molland keeps scrap for wagons." She poured water into the basin and passed him a clean cloth. "You've got sawdust in your hair." He grinned, rinsing his hands. "That's what happens when your wife makes you rebuild the barn roof after dinner. You volunteered. I didn't know it'd be crooked." She raised an eyebrow. "Then you don't know me as well as you think." He stepped closer, brushing a fleck of flour from her cheek. "I'm learning." Later that week, Rosalie asked to ride into town with Gwenyth to see about cloth for a Sunday dress. They hitched the mare to the cart and left Lawson and Remy behind, the house quiet in their absence. The road ran dry and rutted, scattered with rabbit tracks and the odd wagon wheel groove. Gwenyth drove steady, the wide-brimmed hat shielding her eyes from the glare. Rosalie sat beside her, quiet for a while. Then, "Do you think Papa misses her still?" Gwenyth kept her hands on the reins. "I think grief doesn't vanish, but it softens." Rosalie looked down at her lap. "Mama used to hum while she cooked. You don't hum." "I don't know many songs. I could teach you one. I'd like that." They passed a group of cattlemen herding a dozen longhorns across the road. One of them tipped his hat. Gwenyth nodded, then glanced at Rosalie. "Why the question?" "I just wonder if it's all right to be happy again," she said. "If it's not wrong." Gwenyth slowed the cart as they neared the mercantile. "Happiness doesn't dishonor anyone. It just means you've survived." Inside, Rosalie picked a bolt of soft blue calico. Gwenyth added a length of ribbon and a bar of lye soap to the counter. The shopkeeper wrapped the goods in brown paper and tied it with twine. "Your girl's got a good eye," he said. "She's her own mind," Gwenyth replied. On the ride back, Rosalie leaned her head against Gwenyth's shoulder and dozed, the sun warming their backs. When they reached the homestead, Lawson was seated on the porch with Remy asleep on his chest, the boy's hand tangled in his shirt. Lawson raised a brow as they dismounted. "Have a good ride?" "Better than the last," Gwenyth said, lifting the parcel from the cart. "No snow, no half-dead strangers." He smiled quietly. "We've come a ways." That evening, as dusk settled and the frogs began their low chorus, Lawson took Gwenyth's hand as they walked the line of new fence behind the barn. The posts had set well, and saplings along the edge promised shade come high summer. "I got a letter from Kansas," he said, eyes on the horizon. "My brother's wife passed last spring. He asked if I'd take his youngest for a spell. She's 16, restless. Wants to see something new." Gwenyth didn't answer right away. He stopped, turning to her. "I won't say yes without you." "She'd share with Rosalie?" "Likely." "She'd work the land with us?" "She would." Gwenyth ran her thumb along the grain of the fence rail. "We've room. And if she's kin, she's kin." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "Then you've given more than I ever had a right to ask." She met his gaze. "And still, I've more to give." The sun dipped behind the distant ridge, and the air cooled. Lawson slipped an arm around her waist, and they stood together in the hush, the land stretching out before them, full of promise and work and the quiet kind of joy that doesn't shout to be heard. In the house behind them, the children's laughter floated through the open window, and the scent of wood smoke drifted on the wind. Their life was not grand, nor easy, but it was theirs. And it was good. By late July, the heat pressed down like a held breath. The creek had thinned to a steady trickle, and the wind carried the scent of dry sage and sun-warmed pine. Gwenyth brushed sweat from her brow as she eased the bread from the oven, the rising crust already cracking open, golden and ready. Rosalie stood nearby, measuring salt into a wide-mouthed jar, careful and quiet. Outside, Lawson split wood beneath the lean-to, shirt damp at the collar and his swing even. Each time the axe came down, a soft thud echoed across the yard, followed by the clean snap of split pine. A second figure, wiry and tall, stepped up beside him and offered a new log. The girl, Nora, Lawson's niece, had arrived 2 weeks prior with a carpetbag and a guarded expression. Since then, she'd taken to the rhythm of the place with quiet resolve, though she rarely said more than needed. Inside the house, Remy sat at the table making a careful drawing of a cornstalk, his tongue pressed against his lip. Gwenyth passed behind him and paused. "You've given it 6 leaves. It's early for that." He looked up. "I like how it looks that way." "Well then," she said, brushing his hair back, "keep it that way." Nora entered without knocking, boots scuffed and her braid coming undone. "I finished stacking what he split. He says the rest can wait." Gwenyth met her eye. "You hungry? I could eat." Rosalie passed her a plate without being asked, and the girl blinked once before taking it. They ate in the shade of the porch, the breeze dry but steady. Lawson leaned back against the railing, one hand resting on Gwenyth's knee as if it had always belonged there. Nora sat cross-legged on the top step, chewing slowly, her eyes on the pasture. "Molland came by the mill," Lawson said as he reached for the canteen. "He says the train line's moving closer to Helena. They're clearing land 5 miles east." "Will it reach us?" Gwenyth asked. "No. But it'll bring more folks. More need for lumber, too." Rosalie turned to Nora. "You ever seen a train?" "Once." Nora didn't look over. "Didn't care for it." "Why not?" "Too fast. And loud." Lawson chuckled softly. "You sound more and more like your aunt every day." Gwenyth glanced sideways at him. "You say that like it's a complaint." He reached for her hand beneath the table and laced his fingers with hers. "It's not." That evening, Gwenyth found Nora sitting on the barn roof, legs dangling over the edge, watching the sun sink behind the ridge. She climbed the ladder and sat beside her, the shingles warm beneath their skirts. "You're settling in," Gwenyth said. "I'm trying." Nora tugged at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I didn't expect it to feel." "All right. It can," Gwenyth said. "When you stop expecting the worst out of every day. I'm not used to people listening. Or waiting for me to speak. You don't have to rush here." Nora nodded, slow. "I thought I was coming to help. But I think I needed the help more." They sat in silence as the sky turned copper and then blue-black. When Gwenyth climbed down, Lawson was waiting near the gate. He took her hand and walked her back toward the house, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's land north of the wheatgrass flat enough for a second barn. If we ever wanted more stock. Or something else." "Something else?" she asked. "A schoolhouse. Small. Just enough for our girls and any others nearby." Rosalie mentioned it again. "She's not let it go." "She shouldn't. She's right to want it." They stopped near the porch, fireflies blinking slow above the grass. Gwenyth turned to him, her voice low. "I never thought I'd build so much after losing so much. I never thought I'd find someone I could build with." He kissed her, slow and full, the kind of kiss that spoke of everything they'd survived and everything still ahead. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had gone still, they lay curled together under the open window, the air thick with the scent of warm earth and lavender. Gwenyth whispered into his collarbone, "I want to stay here until we're old. I want to plant apple trees and mend fences and teach Remy how to carve." He pulled her closer. "Then we will. I'll be beside you every day we get." She rested her cheek against his chest and listened to the beat of his heart, steady and sure. Years passed. The schoolhouse rose in time, painted white with a bell hung from a cedar post. Rosalie taught there by 18, Nora helping with the younger ones. Remy grew tall and lean, always with a carving knife in his pocket. The wheatgrass gave way to barley, then to rows of corn, and the orchard bore fruit by the 6th year. Gray crept into Lawson's hair, and Gwenyth's hands grew rougher, but her eyes never dimmed. They still walked the fence-line in the evenings, still passed the bread between them at supper, still touched fingers beneath the table when no one was looking. They were not young anymore, but they were deeply rooted. And every night, as the wind settled and the house quieted, Lawson would reach for her in the dark, and Gwenyth would meet him there, knowing finally, completely that love could last through anything, and that what they'd built would stand long after the two of them were gone.